An Ugly Truth. This video is based on key insights from the book An Ugly Truth by Shira Frankel. Chapter 1, Don't Poke the Bear. Shira Frankel details a troubling pattern within Facebook, starting with a single engineer's breach of privacy in 2014. This engineer, feeling lonely after a date that didn't lead to a second one, used his special access to look up his date's private information. He didn't just find her name and birthday. He saw years of messages, photos she'd deleted, her political views, and even where she was right now through her phone's location. This wasn't a one-time thing. Over a year and a half, 52 employees were caught doing similar things, mostly men looking up women they were interested in. Facebook knew this was happening, but the system made it too easy, and there weren't strong rules to stop it. It was like leaving the keys to a treasure chest full of secrets lying around. Frankel explains that Facebook's early belief in moving fast and trusting its engineers created this problem. Mark Zuckerberg wanted engineers to have easy access to information so they could build things quickly. But as the company grew, this open access became dangerous. Alex Stamos, Facebook's new security chief in 2015, discovered the scale of the problem and was shocked. He found that thousands of engineers could see incredibly personal data, and the company hadn't even tried to fix it. Zuckerberg was surprised to learn how widespread the issue was, as no one had brought it to his attention. Despite firing those caught abusing their access, Facebook didn't change the system that allowed it to happen. The author highlights how Facebook prioritized speed and growth over security and privacy. Engineers bragged about having access to a massive testing lab, essentially the personal data of billions of users. They could quickly see what worked and what didn't, but at a huge cost to user privacy. This access wasn't just used for harmless testing. Some engineers tracked women they'd met, confronting them with information they shouldn't have had. Stamos wanted to limit access to private data, reducing the number of employees who could see it from over 16,000 to under 5,000, and even further for the most sensitive information. However, many engineers resisted, fearing it would slow down their work. Frankel then shifts focus to the 2016 election and Facebook's handling of Donald Trump's campaign. When Trump posted a video calling for a ban on Muslims entering the United States, it sparked a debate within Facebook. Many employees felt the post violated the company's rules against hate speech. However, Joel Kaplan, Facebook's head of public policy, advised against removing it. He worried about being seen as biased against Republicans and potentially angering Trump's supporters. Kaplan's background as a former Bush administration official and his connections to conservative circles influenced his advice. The author details how Facebook created a new newsworthiness standard to justify allowing Trump's post to stay up. This meant that political speech, even if controversial, would be given extra protection. Frankel points out this was a convenient excuse, made up on the fly to avoid a political backlash. This decision showed how Facebook was willing to bend its rules to avoid upsetting powerful figures and protect its business interests. The incident revealed a deeper problem: Facebook's reluctance to take strong action against potentially harmful content, even when it violated its own standards. This reluctance stemmed from a fear of being accused of censorship and a desire to maintain good relationships with both political parties. Chapter 2, The Next Big Thing. Shira Frankel details Facebook's early days, revealing a pattern of prioritizing growth over user safety and responsible data handling, setting the stage for later crises. Even before becoming a global phenomenon, Mark Zuckerberg demonstrated a willingness to push boundaries, even if it meant bending rules or disregarding privacy. The initial Facebook wasn't his creation, but his instinct was to break it, showcasing a competitive drive and a disregard for existing structures. This attitude continued with FaceMash, a site that rated female students, sparking immediate privacy concerns and foreshadowing future controversies. Zuckerberg's apologies felt insincere, more about damage control than genuine remorse. Frankel illustrates how Zuckerberg's focus was always on data acquisition, even in those early days. He wasn't interested in simply connecting people. He wanted to collect information about them, believing data held power. He envisioned a platform where users freely shared details, allowing Facebook to build detailed profiles and repurpose that information in ways users hadn't anticipated. This ambition is highlighted in a chat log where Zuckerberg boasts about having access to thousands of students' personal details, dismissing their trust as foolish. This early disregard for user privacy laid the groundwork for future data scandals. The author explains how Zuckerberg's rejection of a $1 billion offer from Yahoo wasn't about principle, but about control and a belief in Facebook's potential for even greater reach. He absorbed the Silicon Valley ethos of rapid growth and disruption, prioritizing innovation and profit over traditional values. This mindset, influenced by figures like Peter Thiel, fostered a culture where ethical concerns were secondary to expansion. The introduction of Newsfeed, despite widespread user backlash, exemplifies this approach. Zuckerberg acknowledged the complaints but ultimately prioritized engagement metrics, demonstrating a willingness to sacrifice user satisfaction for increased time spent on the platform. Frankel points out that Facebook's early content moderation was essentially non-existent. Policies were created reactively, based on gut feelings rather than careful consideration. The lack of clear guidelines allowed problematic content, including hate speech and politically charged advertisements, to flourish. The example of Middle Eastern political groups running graphic ads illustrates this vulnerability. Facebook lacked the infrastructure and the will to effectively police its platform, creating an environment where misinformation and harmful content could spread unchecked. The author emphasizes that Zuckerberg's initial vision wasn't about building a responsible social network, but about creating a space where people would share information and Facebook would collect it. He saw the platform as a tool for understanding human behavior and accumulating power, not as a public service with ethical obligations. This foundational mindset, combined with a relentless pursuit of growth and a disregard for user privacy, set the stage for the challenges Facebook would face as it grew into a global force. Frankel suggests that Zuckerberg's early actions reveal a pattern of prioritizing ambition over accountability, a pattern that would ultimately contribute to the company's later crises. Chapter 3: What Business Are We In? Shira Frankel details how Facebook, even in its early days, showed a pattern of prioritizing growth over protecting its users' information. The story begins with Sheryl Sandberg joining Facebook in 2008, tasked with building a successful advertising business. While Sandberg was skilled, the author illustrates a clash between her desire for careful growth and Mark Zuckerberg's focus on rapidly expanding the platform, even if it meant bending the rules around user privacy. Frankel highlights the Beacon program as an early example of Facebook mishandling data. Beacon automatically shared users' purchases from other websites with their Facebook friends without clear consent. This sparked outrage, as people didn't want their shopping habits publicly displayed. Though Facebook eventually made changes, the author suggests this incident revealed a willingness to exploit user data for profit, even if it felt sneaky and invasive. This was a foreshadowing of issues to come. The author explains how Facebook's business model relied on collecting and using user data to target ads. While Sandberg argued this was a smart way to connect businesses with potential customers, privacy advocates like Jeff Chester saw it as a dangerous overreach. Chester believed Facebook was building a massive database of personal information, and that this data could be misused. The core issue, as Frankel portrays it, was a lack of transparency and control for users over their own information. Frankel details a pivotal moment in 2009 when Facebook changed its privacy settings, making more user information public by default. This move, presented as a simplification of settings, was seen by many as a way to gather more data for advertising. The author notes that this change drew criticism from lawmakers like Senator Chuck Schumer, who felt Facebook wasn't being upfront about how it used user data. This incident showed Facebook's willingness to push boundaries, even if it meant upsetting users and attracting government scrutiny. The author emphasizes that Zuckerberg, despite public statements about openness, was often dismissive of privacy concerns. He seemed to believe that sharing information was a natural part of the online experience and didn't fully grasp the potential risks for users. This disconnect, Frankel suggests, contributed to Facebook's repeated missteps regarding privacy. Frankel points out that the introduction of the like button, while seemingly harmless, was another step towards increased data collection. The like button allowed Facebook to track users' interests across the web, providing even more information for targeted advertising. This feature, though popular, further blurred the lines between public and private information. The chapter concludes with the Federal Trade Commission launching an investigation into Facebook's privacy practices. While a settlement was eventually reached, Frankel implies that it didn't fully address the underlying issues. The author sets the stage for future controversies, suggesting that Facebook's early decisions laid the groundwork for the challenges it would face in later years regarding data privacy, the spread of misinformation, and the amplification of harmful content. The author suggests that Facebook's initial focus on growth, combined with a lack of understanding of the potential consequences, created a dangerous situation for its users. Chapter 4: The Rat Catcher. Shira Frankel details a period in 2016 when Facebook faced growing concerns about its role in spreading harmful information and its internal culture of secrecy. The chapter opens with Facebook employees quietly complaining that the platform was amplifying false news and divisive content, even suggesting it was helping Donald Trump's presidential campaign. These concerns weren't being addressed, and employees who spoke to the press were quickly hunted down by Sonia Ahuja, nicknamed the Rat Catcher, who had access to almost everything on their computers and phones. Facebook's surveillance of its own workers was extreme, even including mousetraps, fake information left to see if anyone would leak it. The story of how Gizmodo published a story about racial tensions at Facebook illustrates the lengths the company went to control information. A journalist, Michael Nunez, received a memo from Mark Zuckerberg addressing employees defacing Black Lives Matter slogans. While seemingly a simple news story, it triggered a full-scale investigation led by Ahuja, who tracked down the source through extensive monitoring of employee communications, even accessing private Gmail conversations. This demonstrated Facebook's willingness to aggressively pursue leakers and maintain control over its narrative. Frankel highlights Facebook's internal debate over its trending topics feature. While presented as algorithmically driven, the feature was actually curated by a team of young journalists. Concerns arose that these curators were manipulating the topics to avoid controversy or push a particular agenda. A story published by Nunez revealed that curators had been instructed to suppress certain topics, like those related to Paul Ryan, raising questions about political bias. This led to a carefully managed meeting between Zuckerberg and conservative media leaders, a move criticized internally as legitimizing sources of misinformation. The chapter reveals a growing tension between Facebook's stated commitment to free speech and its actions to control the flow of information. Executives like Sandberg and Zuckerberg were increasingly focused on managing public perception and avoiding political backlash, particularly from conservatives. Sandberg's focus shifted after the loss of her husband, and she became more easily angered, creating a tense work environment. The author details an incident where Sandberg berated employees over a minor logistical issue, showcasing a demanding and intimidating leadership style. Frankel emphasizes the company's willingness to prioritize growth over user safety. Boz's internal memo, dubbed The Ugly, openly acknowledged that connecting people, even if it led to harm, was the company's primary goal. This attitude, combined with a lack of oversight in content moderation, allowed dangerous and polarizing content to flourish. The story of Common Sense Media's attempt to discuss an eraser button for young users illustrates Facebook's resistance to taking responsibility for the content on its platform and its willingness to intimidate critics. The chapter paints a picture of a company grappling with its immense power and struggling to balance its business interests with its social responsibilities, ultimately choosing the latter less often. Chapter 5, The Warrant Canary. Shira Frankel details how Facebook stumbled into a major crisis during the 2016 presidential election, largely because it wasn't prepared for how easily it could be used to spread trouble. Ned Morin, a Facebook security expert, discovered Russian hackers were chatting with an American journalist, trying to get her to publish stolen emails from the Democratic Party. This wasn't just a simple hack, it was a deliberate attempt to mess with the election. Morin quickly realized the DC Leaks page was a Russian trick, created to look like a legitimate source of information. He reported his findings, but the higher-ups at Facebook didn't seem to fully grasp how serious the situation was. Frankel explains that Facebook had a unique view of what was happening, seeing patterns others missed. They noticed the Russians weren't just targeting politicians, but also people connected to them, family members, lobbyists. Yet, despite these warnings, Facebook's leaders, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, didn't regularly ask the security team for updates. They seemed to want security issues handled quietly, away from their focus on growth and new features like artificial intelligence. This meant crucial information wasn't getting the attention it deserved. The author highlights a key problem. Facebook didn't have rules against what the Russians were doing. They were using the platform exactly as it was designed, making connections and sharing information. The fact that the information was stolen and meant to influence the election didn't matter to Facebook systems. The Russians cleverly timed the release of hacked emails to cause maximum damage, like dropping information right before the Democratic National Convention and coinciding with damaging news about Donald Trump. This created chaos and distracted voters. Frankel shows how Facebook's algorithms actually helped spread the misinformation. Sensational and divisive content, even if false, got more clicks and shares, which meant Facebook's system showed it to more people. Trump's campaign understood this and used Facebook ads effectively, while the Russians exploited the same system to spread their stolen emails and conspiracy theories. The author points out that Facebook's security team felt helpless, reporting the Russian activity to the FBI but receiving little response. The author describes the team's frustration as they watched the situation escalate. They identified a page sharing stolen documents from George Soros, a philanthropist often targeted by conspiracy theories, and finally got Facebook to take it down because it violated the rule against sharing personal information. However, this was a small victory in a much larger battle. Ultimately, Frankel illustrates that Facebook was unprepared for the scale and sophistication of the Russian interference, and its slow response allowed misinformation and division to spread rapidly across the platform, potentially influencing the election's outcome. The team felt a sense of dread as they realized the platform was being used to manipulate voters and undermine the democratic process. Chapter 6, A Pretty Crazy Idea. The day after the 2016 election, a quiet shock settled over Facebook's Washington, D.C. office. Shira Frankel details how the policy team, many visibly upset, gathered to face a new reality. Donald Trump had won. Joel Kaplan, a top Facebook executive, admitted the company would likely be blamed for the spread of false information on the site, and some employees secretly agreed, believing Facebook's relaxed rules had actually helped Trump get elected. Despite supporting Hillary Clinton, Kaplan urged the team to work together. Frankel explains that Facebook had a large lobbying team, mostly focused on preventing rules that could slow its growth. But Kaplan wanted to change that, quickly creating a list of people connected to Trump to potentially hire. They even met with Corey Lewandowski, Trump's former campaign manager, who offered to use his access to Trump for $25,000 a month. While some saw this as a way to protect Facebook from Trump's unpredictable behavior, others worried Lewandowski didn't fit the company's image, and ultimately, Facebook didn't hire him. Meanwhile, back at Facebook headquarters, Mark Zuckerberg was facing a different problem. Frankel writes that people were starting to say Facebook was responsible for Trump's win because of the fake news spreading on the platform. Zuckerberg ordered his team to gather data to prove this wasn't true, hoping to show that false news was a small part of what people saw on Facebook. However, they quickly realized even a small percentage of fake news meant millions of misleading stories were reaching voters. Zuckerberg had a public appearance scheduled just days after the election. Frankel notes his team prepared him for questions about the election, setting up a friendly interview with someone who had previously written a positive book about Facebook. When asked if Facebook had noticed signs of a Trump win, Zuckerberg admitted they could have analyzed the data, but hadn't. He then downplayed the impact of fake news, calling the idea that it influenced the election a pretty crazy idea. Frankel reveals this statement caused a huge backlash. News outlets criticized Zuckerberg for not taking responsibility. Inside Facebook, employees were confused and worried, questioning whether the company had unintentionally helped Trump win. Some demanded an investigation into the role of fake news. Alex Stamos, Facebook's head of security, was shocked by Zuckerberg's comments. He knew his team had been reporting alarming Russian activity on the platform for months and assumed Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, another top executive, were being informed. Stamos requested a meeting with both of them, concerned they were unaware of the extent of the problem. Chapter 7, Company over Country. Shira Frankel details a frantic period at Facebook in late 2016 and early 2017, revealing a company slow to recognize and respond to Russian interference in the U.S. election. The chapter shows how Facebook's internal structure and priorities hindered its ability to protect its users from misinformation and manipulation. When Alex Stamos, Facebook's head of security, finally presented evidence of a deliberate Russian campaign to influence the election, top executives like Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg were initially caught off guard and seemed more concerned with protecting Facebook's reputation than addressing the threat. Stamos's report showed Russians were creating fake accounts, spreading false news stories, and even using stolen information to discredit people. Frankel illustrates how Facebook prioritized secrecy over transparency. Stamos wasn't allowed to email his findings to executives beforehand, fearing leaks. Even after the briefing, there was resistance to acknowledging the problem publicly. Zuckerberg and Sandberg were worried about how admitting Russian interference would look, especially as they anticipated scrutiny from Congress and the incoming Trump administration. This reluctance to be upfront meant Facebook delayed taking meaningful action to remove fake accounts and stop the spread of false information. The company's initial response was cautious, focusing on studying the problem rather than actively combating it. The author highlights a key issue: Facebook's internal politics. Stamos faced pushback from other executives, like Boz and Cox, who felt he was acting independently and creating unnecessary alarm. They questioned whether he had enough proof and worried about the implications of revealing the extent of the Russian operation. This internal friction slowed down the investigation and prevented a unified response. It became clear that being proactive wasn't always valued at Facebook. Executives seemed more comfortable reacting to crises than preventing them. Frankel demonstrates how Facebook's business interests often overshadowed concerns about user safety. The company feared that acknowledging Russian interference could lead to increased regulation or damage its relationship with the Trump administration, which was already downplaying the issue. Lobbyists warned Facebook that the Trump administration wouldn't appreciate being told Russia had influenced the election. This created a conflict between Facebook's responsibility to protect its users and its desire to maintain a positive public image and political standing. The chapter reveals that even when Facebook's security team uncovered a network of fake news sites, many run by teenagers for profit, the company hesitated to take decisive action. While the motives weren't always political, the spread of misinformation was still harmful. Facebook's initial response was to downplay the problem, with Sandberg suggesting Stamos's warnings might have been exaggerated. This reluctance to acknowledge the scale of the problem allowed the spread of false information to continue unchecked. Frankel shows how Facebook's culture discouraged dissent and independent thinking. Stamos's attempts to raise awareness about the Russian threat were met with resistance, and he was eventually sidelined. When he pushed for a public report detailing the findings, executives watered it down, removing any mention of Russia. This demonstrates a pattern of prioritizing control and minimizing risk over transparency and accountability. Stamos ultimately felt forced to resign, realizing he was on the outside looking in. The author concludes by illustrating the ongoing tension between Facebook's security team and its leadership. Despite uncovering evidence of Russian interference, Facebook continued to struggle with how to respond. The company's initial reluctance to acknowledge the problem, its internal conflicts, and its prioritization of business interests all contributed to a delayed and inadequate response. The chapter paints a picture of a company grappling with the consequences of its own success, struggling to balance its responsibilities to its users with its desire for growth and influence. Chapter 8, Delete Facebook. Shira Frankel details how the Cambridge Analytica scandal brought Facebook's problems with user data, fake news, and harmful speech into the spotlight. It all began in March 2018, when news broke that a company, Cambridge Analytica, had gotten information from millions of Facebook users without their permission. This included things like what they liked, shared, and even where they lived. The firm, connected to Donald Trump's campaign, wanted to use this data to target voters with specific ads, playing on their feelings and beliefs. This was a big deal because it showed how easily Facebook data could be misused to influence elections. Frankel explains that this wasn't a one-time mistake. Facebook had a long history of letting apps access user information, creating a way for companies like Cambridge Analytica to collect data on a huge scale. A former Facebook employee, Sandy Parakillas, had even warned the company years earlier that this system was dangerous and could lead to data being stolen or misused. But his warnings were ignored. The author highlights that Facebook prioritized growth and getting more users over protecting people's privacy. The scandal led to Mark Zuckerberg having to answer tough questions from Congress. Frankel vividly describes Zuckerberg's appearance as tired and uncomfortable, facing a room full of angry lawmakers. While Zuckerberg apologized and promised to do better, Frankel points out that his answers were often vague and didn't fully address the core issues. He claimed Facebook didn't sell data, but the author notes that Facebook's advertising tools allowed companies to target users in incredibly specific ways, essentially using data to influence their behavior. Frankel reveals that Facebook also fought against stricter privacy laws, spending millions of dollars on lobbying to keep regulations loose. This showed that the company was more concerned with protecting its profits than with protecting its users. The author details how Facebook's leaders, Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, reacted to the crisis, with Zuckerberg focusing on technical details and Sandberg trying to control the public narrative. Both seemed more worried about the company's image than about the harm that had been done. The author emphasizes that Facebook's business model, making money from ads targeted to users, was at the heart of the problem. The more data Facebook collected, the more effective its ads became, and the more money it made. This created a powerful incentive to gather as much information as possible, even if it meant compromising user privacy. Frankel illustrates this with examples of how advertisers could target people based on their religious beliefs, political views, and even their income. Frankel notes the irony of the congressional hearing itself. Many lawmakers seem to lack a basic understanding of how Facebook worked, asking questions that revealed their own technological illiteracy. This allowed Zuckerberg to deflect criticism and portray Facebook as a complex platform that was simply misunderstood. Ultimately, the author suggests that Facebook managed to turn a crisis into an opportunity, shifting the blame to Washington and avoiding meaningful regulation. The scandal exposed a system where a company prioritized profit over people, and where the rules governing the digital world were woefully inadequate. Chapter 9, Think Before You Share. Shira Frankel details how Facebook's problems stretched far beyond the Cambridge Analytica scandal, quickly becoming about much bigger issues like addiction to the platform, unfair rules, and the spread of lies, especially during elections. Lawmakers questioned Facebook, asking for internal data to see if the company was protecting users and following privacy laws around the world. A particularly horrifying example came to light: the genocide happening in Myanmar. In 2017, soldiers in Myanmar were posting hateful messages about the Rohingya, a Muslim minority group, directly onto Facebook. These posts weren't just angry words. They showed where attacks were happening and even included pictures. While human rights groups tried to document the violence, the government denied everything and spread false stories. Facebook became a tool for spreading hate and tracking the military's movements. The United Nations concluded that Facebook played a determining role in the genocide, with one official stating that, in Myanmar, Facebook was social media. Over 24,000 Rohingya were killed, and 700,000 fled to Bangladesh. Mark Zuckerberg assured lawmakers they would hire more Burmese speakers and work with groups to remove harmful accounts. However, at the time, Facebook only had 5 Burmese speakers for 18 million users. Sheryl Sandberg later called the situation devastating and said they were taking action, but the company had been warned for years that it needed to do more. The problem began as early as 2013, when an aid worker named Matt Skisler noticed a surge of anti-Muslim sentiment in Myanmar. People were sharing false photos and videos claiming Muslims were plotting attacks. This happened right as cell phones and Facebook became widely available in the country. Facebook quickly became the main way people got their news, and it was often filled with lies. A Buddhist monk known for his anti-Muslim views, Ashen Warathu, used Facebook to spread his hateful messages, posting altered images and rumors. These posts were shared widely, creating fear and anger. Facebook's arrival felt like a chance for people to express themselves freely in a country with a history of strict control. But it also allowed hate speech to spread quickly and easily. Skisler warned people at Facebook about the dangers, but his concerns were dismissed. Zuckerberg, meanwhile, was focused on connecting the entire world to the internet. In 2013, he announced his goal to reach the next 5 billion users, believing internet access would improve lives and economies. He didn't fully consider the risks of expanding into countries with unstable political situations. No one was responsible for carefully considering the impact Facebook would have on different cultures. Facebook's initial response to the problems in Myanmar was slow and inadequate. When riots broke out in 2014 after false rumors spread online, Facebook didn't respond to warnings from activists until the government shut down the platform entirely. It turned out Facebook had only one Burmese-speaking moderator for the entire country. The company's attempts to fix the problem, like creating sticker packs to discourage hate speech, actually made the harmful posts more visible. Skisler met with Facebook employees in 2015, presenting evidence of the growing violence and the role Facebook played in it. He warned that genocide was possible, but his concerns were brushed aside. Facebook prioritized growth over safety, and its algorithms were designed to promote engagement, even if that meant spreading harmful content. Later, human rights groups tried to get Facebook to share data that could be used to prosecute soldiers involved in the genocide. Facebook refused, citing privacy concerns and a lack of internal processes. Despite having a history of cooperating with law enforcement on other cases, Facebook wouldn't help bring justice to the Rohingya. Frankel concludes that Facebook had many opportunities to do the right thing, but consistently chose not to. Chapter 10: The Wartime Leader. Shira Frankel details a pivotal moment in Facebook's history, July 2018, where the company's leaders grappled with a growing crisis of trust. The M Team, a gathering of top executives, met with a forced optimism, having spent 18 months battling bad press stemming from scandals like the Cambridge Analytica data leak and accusations of enabling election interference. Many within Facebook felt personally attacked, defending the company to friends and family while privately questioning the leadership of Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. The meeting revealed a company at a crossroads. Zuckerberg, influenced by business philosophies that categorized leadership styles as wartime or peacetime, declared a shift. He believed Facebook was no longer in a period of growth and goodwill, but rather a battle for survival against public distrust, regulatory investigations, and legal challenges. He intended to take more direct control, moving away from delegation and embracing a more assertive, centralized leadership style. This declaration followed a reorganization, consolidating power within Zuckerberg's reach. However, internal surveys showed a demoralized workforce. Employees were troubled by Facebook's role in spreading misinformation and the fallout from the scandals, leading to high turnover and difficulty attracting new talent. Despite Zuckerberg's focus on innovation with products like Portal and Oculus, the underlying issues of trust and employee morale remained. Sandberg attempted to project a positive outlook, emphasizing the company's mission and claiming they were putting the wheels back on the bus. But this optimism proved short-lived. Frankel highlights Facebook's continued struggles with harmful content. Zuckerberg, in an interview, defended allowing even demonstrably false and hateful content, like Holocaust denial, to remain on the platform, arguing against becoming an arbiter of truth. This stance, rooted in a belief in free expression, drew widespread criticism and revealed a disconnect between Facebook's leadership and public expectations. The author notes this position was influenced by Silicon Valley's libertarian ideals and a desire for a neutral, algorithm-driven approach to content moderation. The chapter details Facebook's attempts to address election interference, including the creation of a war room and the hiring of security experts. However, the experience of Yael Eisenstadt, a former CIA officer hired to combat election manipulation, exposed a frustrating reality. Eisenstadt found herself sidelined, her efforts to proactively address potential voter suppression tactics blocked by internal bureaucracy and a reluctance to challenge the status quo. She discovered Facebook prioritized protecting its business interests, even if it meant allowing potentially harmful content to spread. Frankel reveals a troubling incident involving the hiring of Definer's Public Affairs, a firm tasked with discrediting Facebook's critics, including George Soros. This included spreading information about Soros's funding of anti-Facebook groups, inadvertently playing into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. When this became public, Sandberg initially attempted to distance herself, but was later forced to acknowledge her awareness of the firm's activities. The episode further eroded trust in Facebook's leadership and raised questions about its commitment to ethical behavior. Ultimately, the chapter paints a picture of a company grappling with the consequences of its own success and struggling to adapt to a new era of scrutiny. Zuckerberg's shift to wartime leadership, while intended to address the crisis, seemed to exacerbate internal tensions and reinforce a culture of control and defensiveness. The author suggests that Facebook's core problem wasn't simply a matter of public relations, but a fundamental conflict between its stated values and its actual practices regarding user data, misinformation, and harmful speech. Chapter 11, Coalition of the Willing. Shira Frankel details a tense period for Mark Zuckerberg, filled with global meetings to defend Facebook against growing criticism. As Zuckerberg traveled, a powerful op-ed from his Harvard roommate and Facebook co-founder, Chris Hughes, landed like a bomb. Hughes argued Facebook had become a dangerous monopoly, prioritizing growth over user safety and truth. He believed the company's size and Zuckerberg's control were the core problems, advocating for a government breakup of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Frankel shows how Facebook immediately went into defense mode, dismissing Hughes as out of touch and questioning his motives. However, Hughes wasn't alone. Other early Facebook leaders, like Sean Parker, were also speaking out, adding fuel to a growing movement calling for the company to be dismantled. Politicians from both sides of the aisle, including Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump, were voicing concerns about Facebook's power. This pressure was happening as Zuckerberg met with French President Macron, trying to navigate new regulations. The author highlights a key shift within Facebook itself. Zuckerberg announced a pivot to privacy, focusing on encrypted messaging and private groups. While presented as a user-friendly change, internal experts like Rita Fabi and Chris Cox raised alarms. Fabi, a director of online safety, worried encryption would shield criminals and make it harder to catch predators and stop harmful content. Cox, a longtime friend and advisor to Zuckerberg, shared these concerns, fearing the move would allow disinformation and hate speech to spread unchecked. Both ultimately left the company due to disagreements with Zuckerberg's vision. Frankel explains how this push for privacy actually strengthened Facebook's control. By merging the back-end technologies of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, Zuckerberg could gather more user data and keep people within the Facebook ecosystem. This contradicted earlier promises made to regulators and the founders of Instagram and WhatsApp, who had been assured their apps would remain independent. The author details how Facebook had a pattern of acquiring competitors and then either integrating them or letting them fail, solidifying its dominance. The narrative reveals a growing understanding among experts like Tim Wu and Scott Hemphill that Facebook's actions mirrored those of historical monopolies, like Standard Oil. They argued Facebook wasn't just a social network, but a powerful entity actively working to eliminate competition. Hughes connected with Wu and others, forming a coalition to push for antitrust action. They presented their case to state attorneys general and the Department of Justice, arguing that breaking up Facebook was the only way to address its harmful effects on society. Frankel emphasizes that Facebook's response to criticism often involved downplaying the risks and prioritizing profits. Even as the FTC prepared to fine Facebook a record $5 billion for the Cambridge Analytica data privacy scandal, the company's stock price rose because investors saw the fine as a manageable cost of doing business. Hughes was outraged, realizing that privacy violations were simply accepted as a necessary part of Facebook's model. The chapter concludes with a sense of mounting pressure on Zuckerberg as the consequences of Facebook's choices began to close in. Chapter 12, Existential Threat. Shira Frankel details a particularly difficult period for Facebook and Sheryl Sandberg, as the company faced increasing scrutiny from lawmakers regarding its role in spreading misinformation and protecting user privacy. Just before an opinion piece by Mark Zuckerberg acknowledging some of these issues was published, Sandberg met with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. These meetings were tense, with legislators demanding to know what Facebook was doing to prevent the problems that had plagued the 2020 elections, like the misuse of personal information and the spread of false stories. Sandberg's attempts to reassure Pelosi focused on Facebook's efforts to remove fake accounts, hire content moderators, and use artificial intelligence to detect and remove harmful content. She also highlighted Zuckerberg's public statements supporting new privacy rules. However, the conversation revealed a deep distrust, as Pelosi remembered a much warmer reception for Sandberg years earlier. This shift in tone underscored the growing frustration with Facebook's handling of serious issues. The situation quickly escalated with the viral spread of a manipulated video of Pelosi. The video, slowed down to make her appear intoxicated, quickly gained traction on Facebook, particularly within private, partisan groups. Despite Pelosi never drinking alcohol, the altered video fueled accusations and a trending hashtag, #DrunkNancy. While YouTube quickly removed the clip, Facebook initially hesitated, demonstrating a troubling pattern of slow response to misinformation. This incident highlighted how easily Facebook systems could be tricked and how quickly false narratives could spread. Frankel explains that the Christchurch mosque shootings earlier that year had already exposed weaknesses in Facebook's ability to prevent the spread of violent content. The gunman intentionally used Facebook to promote his horrific act, and the platform struggled to remove the footage quickly enough. The Pelosi video showed that even simpler manipulations could bypass Facebook's safeguards. The company's internal debate over whether to remove the video revealed a conflict between prioritizing free speech and protecting against disinformation. Ultimately, Zuckerberg decided to leave the video up, a decision that deeply upset Pelosi and led her to cut off communication with Facebook. The author notes that Facebook's response to the crisis involved a strategy of deflecting blame and focusing on the threat posed by China. Nick Clegg, a new hire, was brought in to argue against breaking up the company and to emphasize the importance of American tech companies in competing with China. This tactic, however, failed to gain support from other tech companies. Simultaneously, Facebook faced multiple antitrust investigations from the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general, adding to the mounting pressure. Frankel details how Facebook's announcement of Libra, a new digital currency, further complicated matters, drawing criticism from regulators concerned about its potential for misuse. Zuckerberg's response was defiant, promising to go to the mat if anyone threatened the company's existence. This period illustrated a pattern of Facebook prioritizing its own interests over addressing the concerns of lawmakers and the public regarding data privacy, the spread of fake news, and the amplification of harmful content. The author suggests that Facebook's actions demonstrated a willingness to enable disinformation rather than actively combat it. Chapter 13: The Oval Interference. Shira Frankel details a secret meeting between Mark Zuckerberg and President Trump in September 2019, revealing a calculated effort by Facebook to mend fences with a leader who publicly criticized the platform. This meeting wasn't about friendly chat. It was about Facebook trying to stop Trump from being angry about the site. Trump felt Facebook wasn't fair to his supporters and still held a grudge from the 2016 election when many in Silicon Valley supported Hillary Clinton. Despite Trump's complaints, Facebook needed him just as much as he needed them to reach people. Frankel shows how Zuckerberg attempted to appease Trump by highlighting the president's success on Facebook. He had the most engagement of any world leader. Zuckerberg also played on Trump's fears about China, pointing out that apps like TikTok were becoming more popular than American ones. This was a smart move, appealing to Trump's nationalist views and desire to protect American companies. However, this strategy masked a deeper issue: Facebook's struggle with misinformation and harmful content. The author illustrates a growing divide within Facebook itself. While Zuckerberg's team in Washington focused on political maneuvering, employees back in California, known as Menlo Park, were increasingly worried about the company's ethics. They felt Zuckerberg was prioritizing profits over user safety. This tension was clear as Zuckerberg began meeting with both conservative and liberal leaders, trying to appear neutral while quietly protecting Facebook's interests. Frankel emphasizes that Facebook's handling of the 2020 election was particularly troubling. Trump's campaign planned to spend a huge amount of money on Facebook ads, using targeted messaging to influence voters. The campaign's strategy, as described by former advisor Steve Bannon, was to flood the zone with shit, essentially, to overwhelm people with so much information, true or false, that they wouldn't know what to believe. Facebook allowed these ads to run, even if they contained misleading information, under a new policy championed by Nick Clegg, who argued that political speech should be largely unrestricted. This decision sparked outrage from civil rights groups, who accused Facebook of enabling voter suppression and discrimination. Sheryl Sandberg attempted to repair relations by attending a civil rights conference, but the damage was done. The timing of Clegg's announcement, just days before the conference, felt like a betrayal. Facebook's claim of protecting free speech rang hollow when it meant allowing politicians to spread lies without consequence. Frankel details how Facebook's policies allowed a false ad attacking Joe Biden to circulate widely, racking up millions of views before being addressed. This incident highlighted the company's unwillingness to fact-check political ads, a decision that drew criticism from lawmakers and advocates. Zuckerberg defended this policy in a speech at Georgetown University, arguing that people should be able to decide for themselves what to believe. However, this stance was seen as irresponsible, given Facebook's immense power to shape public opinion. The author reveals Zuckerberg's growing frustration with public perception. He felt his charitable work was overlooked and wanted to be seen as a philanthropist like Bill Gates. However, his attempts to rebrand himself were overshadowed by concerns about Facebook's ethical failings. Ultimately, Frankel portrays a company grappling with its own power and influence, struggling to balance profits with its responsibility to protect its users from misinformation and hate. The chapter shows a clear pattern of Facebook prioritizing its own interests over the well-being of its users and the health of democracy. Chapter 14, Good for the World. Shira Frankel details how Facebook, under Mark Zuckerberg's leadership, reacted, and often overreacted, to the unfolding chaos of the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 election, revealing a pattern of prioritizing public image and business interests over truly addressing the spread of misinformation and harmful content. Even before the world fully understood the danger, Zuckerberg was receiving briefings about the virus and quickly mobilized Facebook to become a source of information. However, this swift response was also a PR move, designed to improve Facebook's reputation. The author shows how Zuckerberg tracked metrics like whether people thought Facebook was good for the world, and saw a boost in those numbers as the company presented itself as a responsible actor during the crisis. Frankel illustrates how Facebook struggled to balance free speech principles with the need to combat dangerous falsehoods. When President Trump suggested injecting disinfectant to treat COVID-19, Facebook removed some posts repeating the idea, but crucially, did not touch Trump's original statement. This highlighted a double standard, where the platform protected powerful figures even when they spread harmful misinformation. Zuckerberg seemed to believe he could reason with Trump, but the president consistently defied expectations, using Facebook to bypass rules and engage his followers. The author emphasizes how Facebook's policies created a protected class for politicians, allowing them to spread misleading information with little consequence. This became especially clear during the protests following George Floyd's death. When Trump posted a threatening message about protesters, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," Facebook hesitated to take action, arguing it wasn't a direct call for violence. Twitter, in contrast, labeled the post as glorifying violence, putting pressure on Facebook to respond. Zuckerberg ultimately sided with protecting Trump, even as employees protested internally. Frankel reveals a growing disconnect between Zuckerberg's stated commitment to free expression and the reality of how Facebook's algorithms amplified harmful content. The platform's push to encourage group creation, intended to increase user engagement, inadvertently created echo chambers for conspiracy theories and extremist groups. While Facebook eventually banned QAnon and Holocaust denial, these actions felt reactive and inconsistent, driven more by public pressure than a fundamental shift in policy. The author points out that Facebook often made changes to address problems, then quietly reverted to old settings when it impacted user numbers. The chapter details the internal turmoil at Facebook, as employees increasingly question the company's decisions. A virtual walkout and open criticism of Zuckerberg demonstrated a deep frustration with the platform's handling of misinformation and hate speech. Employees felt Facebook was prioritizing profit and political considerations over its responsibility to protect users and democracy. Zuckerberg's attempts to address these concerns, such as appointing Maxine Williams to oversee diversity efforts, were seen as superficial and ineffective. Frankel highlights the tension between Facebook's stated values and its actual practices. Zuckerberg expressed fear for democracy to civil rights leaders, yet consistently made choices that allowed harmful content to flourish. The author shows how Facebook's algorithms and policies, combined with a reluctance to fully enforce its own rules, created a platform where misinformation could spread rapidly and unchecked. The events surrounding the January 6th Capitol riot served as a stark example of the real-world consequences of Facebook's inaction, with rioters organizing and sharing plans on the platform. Ultimately, the chapter portrays a company struggling to reconcile its immense power with its responsibility to protect the public from the dangers of its own creation. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.